With everything going on involving Liverpool's transfers right now, I just wanted to run through a little bit of why Liverpool make their transfers, how you rebuild a squad, what rebuilding a squad actually means, and why Liverpool got into this situation in the first place, and how a lot of people seem to be giving them credit for getting out of it, even though they've not actually played a game yet. Welcome back to the Lawrence McKenna channel. It's good to have you guys. And obviously, I'm a huge Liverpool fan, someone who's been, following the team since childhood. Probably zero, but can you really watch a team at that stage? And yet, I've only ever seen this team play together once. Now, this is a well-known fact in Liverpool circles. This side only played together in one Champions League final, and apparently never again. I mean, maybe in training, but you get my point. There's a formality to this that people seem to be a bit obsessed with. Now, the simple explanation of this is Joel Matip's injury record and potentially a bit of rotation elsewhere in the team, but mostly Joe Gomez and Joel Matip just being those guys. So it's a bit of an arbitrary fact, but what it does do is it feeds into this idea for so many different people that people have kind of had throughout this time, but then another, that seems quite unusual, right? If I was to show you, and I will show you, this Liverpool team, which was basically that side, there were few options, but this was Jurgen Klopp's ideal starting 11. The smaller, more cohesive, everyone knows where they're meant to go, everyone can take tactical instructions, workhorse of a midfield, along with very functional midfield, along with extremely creative front line that was able to run plays almost instinctively, along with a back line that knew how to pick out those plays with an almost quarterback-like quality, hence why Joel Matip was so important in that. And also Virgil van Dijk with that ball forward as well was also incredible. And then also, we obviously need to give Robertson and Trent a bit of credit in that midfield. Why am I referencing this? Because when rebuilding a side, people often get a little bit obsessed with what the starting 11 is, with what it is that they're meant to do, and they kind of prescribe what it is that Jurgen Klopp's meant to do with a team and fit people into different spaces. Even though really the next generation of what's going to happen in this footballing meta right now is a little bit more complex than that, actually. And that's why Liverpool, I think, struggled last year. They were rebuilding a team that was so great, and they really had actually moved away from that previous footballing idea, or when they brought in Thiago. Thiago wasn't part of that squad. Thiago, of course, is a fantastic player, but in order to play Thiago, who, by the way, I think is very often a misprofiled player, you had to kind of change a couple of things in the team. It wasn't that the team had to have less intensity. It wasn't that the team had to have less ability in winning the ball back. In fact, Thiago was incredibly good at winning the ball back and was incredibly good at winning the ball back in very specific scenarios, right? And that's great. I think that is something that obviously Klopp and Pep Lingers wanted. But they kind of became a bit preoccupied with what Thiago brought to this side. And in many ways, it's sort of distracted from what everyone else was doing, right? I've left out a couple of big names in there, but obviously, when Thiago first came in, he still had Mane, he still had Firmino. Liverpool were ticking pretty well, and actually at the zenith of Liverpool's powers, just the season before, the one that's just gone, Thiago was also quite a big part of that team, if even then he was injured quite a fair bit. But that was also down to the fact that teams don't just operate in isolation. So the midfield that Liverpool are rebuilding right now will have to gel that back line, which, by the way, is so much more tethered to the midfield now, into that front line, which, by the way, is so integrated with that midfield in so many ways. So I just wanted to go through some of this, right? Because to me, I find it so interesting. Just look at that side right there. You would have said that side was much more functional and capable than they showed they were last season. And yet, there was a team that struggled and stuttered, and a huge amount of that was down to injuries, a huge amount of that was down to gelling and changing of the system, a huge amount of that was down to the squad not actually maybe appreciating where it was that they were going and knowing that some of their own roles would become defunct in this new iteration of the team. And so change can sometimes be difficult, especially within a squad that is so used to functioning at the very top level, having such a high-performing output, and also a team that's used to not being thrown under the bus. But this has happened before. Even in transitioning into this iteration of Liverpool, they got thrown under the bus a number of times. You remember the high line that Klopp suddenly, or relatively suddenly, asked them to play with. That season, Virgil van Dijk was over, Robertson was over, Trent was even capable. The midfield, were they done? Fabinho, could he actually defend? Henderson, was he too old to do all this kind of thing? You know, was Salah now disinterested? Did Mane want to leave? When were things going to fall apart? Was Firmino the best number 9 for Liverpool at that time? These are all pretty lazy, but also, I guess, the only questions that if you watch Liverpool fairly rarely, you would ask. And so moving into where Liverpool are going to go next, that is what is important to me. Because honestly, look at this side. I can not only tell you about the shape, and probably rival fans can tell you about the shape, they could probably name all of the starting lineup and beyond that, but also the ability to play on the fly. You remember the win against Barcelona, obviously, because that side was so brilliant. That win against Barcelona didn't have some of the big names in due to suspensions, injuries, etc. Shaqiri started on, or Shaqiri to give him his native name. Henderson was so key in that. Liverpool were 3-0 down in that fixture. And Robertson, all these kind of big names, obviously Trent Alexander-Arnold, corner taken quickly. Origi, great finish. It's about having more than just this starting 11 and this fixed idea of how a team plays. Because in fact, when playing Barcelona, Liverpool had to change or tinker with minor things which made a huge difference to their side. Hence, why we get to now. If you look back then, and I'll just go back to there one more time, look at the instinctive midfielders that when I made a documentary about Liverpool, or specifically Jordan Henderson, the two being interchangeable, you can basically point to any player in that team and go, leader. Alisson, leader. Not leader in his own field, but also leader of that back line. Virgil van Dijk, leader. Not only a world-class player, but also a leader in that back line. Maybe Joel Matip isn't a leader, but he's someone that you can look to take the ball forward, to be a leader within his own section of the field. Trent, clearly someone who's an outspoken, influential player within the squad, and Robertson is clearly a leader within that team. Henderson, not necessarily the most skilled player in the side, but that's always an unfair and I would say slightly disingenuous way of evaluating him. The same for Fabinho. I think Fabinho is so key, but not a leader, but clearly someone who's a spine within that side. And then someone that Liverpool have never really replaced, Gini. Gini Wijnaldum was so key to that previous system that suddenly people started going, hey, he's not in this new system, therefore it doesn't work. Liverpool were looking to achieve something new, so what you were looking for was possibly an unfair way of judging this side. But we can move on from that for a second. Mane, clearly a leader. Salah, clearly a leader in terms of goals and on-the-pitch actions, but also just well-liked within the team. And then Firmino, clearly a different kind of leader. Now, there are going to be people in the comments going, oh, you don't know what a leader is. You don't define a leader, because every video that I make, I called Maxi Rodriguez a Liverpool legend, and people went, well, strictly by the definition. And this is kind of what I'm talking about here. And this is what leads me on to why I wanted to talk about the rebuild of the squad. This is roughly where you could see Liverpool moving in 2024, right? There is still a very similar looking back line, and maybe they will get another centre-back within there, right? But how different is this to this previous iteration of the Liverpool side? And where do the leaders, the character, the leadership qualities, the constitution of the team, and also the makeup get quantified in this side? I can show you, I can tell you, and I'll mainly focus on this midfield, but I'll tell you what else is interesting about this side, right? Liverpool, they've got a series of guys in there who, again, despite the fact that in previous eras, Liverpool and specifically Pep Linders said, we only want guys who are coming through at the very beginning or guys who are at the very top of the game. Probably saying that they only wanted people like a Szoboszlai, or someone like that, or a Bellingham. People who are coming through, or someone at the very top of his game and was entering that period. Now look at the rebuild of this Liverpool side, right? A lot of questions over a number of different players last season. And in fact, in this starting 11 / the subs, I've not even managed to include Henderson in there. I should have put more subs in there. I can only find one space for one sub at this point, but that's that area. Henderson will clearly be part of that. And you probably put Curtis Jones as part of that. Towards the end of the season, you probably would have said that Liverpool functioned really well with those guys in the midfield. And in fact, Fabinho looked a lot more comfortable in that position as well. So did Bajcetic before he got injured. And in fact, you could even include Bajcetic in there. There are a number of different players, right? Hakpo began to get a lot more ease on the ball. He began to integrate with the Liverpool team so much more seamlessly. Diaz obviously came back from injury. Jota, so key to this midfield, so key to the shape and the passing routes that Liverpool look for. And Salah, he's listed as a second striker in here. Interestingly, I didn't notice that before I started this, but that's kind of my point. Like, he slotted back inside the width and the triangle that Liverpool try and create, or now weird square that Liverpool try and make out there with Konate getting the ball forward and Trent coming back. Even at times you saw the ball go diagonally more to someone like a Thiago or someone like that. You see what I'm saying? The movement that you would have identified with this Liverpool team is quite different with this Liverpool team. And yet some of the qualities that this side have are still there. The ability to pick out the long ball from the air, Diaz, Jota, Nunez, Salah, even Cody Gakpo. All those guys could still get a ball from Konate or Virgil van Dijk or even an Andy Robertson or a Trent from the midfield and do something comfortable, right? But what I want to go to is a quote now actually from a Man City coach, right? Who's Juanma Lillo. I want to say Juanma. We don't even realize the mess we've made. We've globalized methodology to an extent that it's crept into the World Cup. If you got the Cameroon and Brazil players to change shirts at halftime, you wouldn't even realize. Now you might think, hey, Lawrence, like, what are you even talking about here? This doesn't even seem relevant to this subject matter. What I'm talking about here is a lack of appreciation for the nuances of so many of these sides within the Premier League, and maybe just looking for very similar ideas, but also obviously the similar ideas that different managers such as Pep Guardiola, Arteta, Jurgen Klopp, even if you go to Brighton, even if you go to Aston Villa, even if you go to Manchester United, there are a lot of very similar ideas because people see their work and they don't want to ape them, but they do want to try to find a way of recreating the success that those teams found. But what that requires is a team of incredibly technically proficient players. That's why when you look at Liverpool, when you look at the change in the midfield shape, when you look at the change in the midfield type, why do you think people are saying Fabinho is no longer the player he was? Because he's not being asked to play the same role. In fact, very rarely did you see Fabinho even play a role that he looked comfortable in last season. But I saw him a couple of times do it. And weirdly, I saw him do it in massive losses for Liverpool. I saw him trying to do it. I saw him in Naples trying to be that conduit in midfield, trying to play a more advanced role, trying to be more involved with the play. I didn't hate it. It's just that Napoli was so good there. Check Napoli doc in a little while. Trent obviously struggled at right back in that time because of what he was being asked to do in terms of an attacking element. So it wasn't always just Trent. Trent was being told go forward, and whoever, be Gomez, it was Gomez at that time. Sadly, Gomez got hung out to dry and really let in 2 goals during that game. But people focus too micro, as opposed to the macro, right? Konate is now in at that area. He's an incredibly aggressive centre-back. But my point is also this, right? This formation, even if done correctly, will probably not be the long term for Liverpool. There is probably an iteration beyond this that Liverpool need to look at. And that's why I wanted to look at where they were transitioning the midfield to and from, and where the experience in this midfield stays. I'm just editing this video. I just want to drop something in very quickly, even though the video is already long enough, right? The huge part of what Liverpool are trying to rebuild here and the values and the things they're trying to instill are really, really important for this team. This isn't just, I spoke about character and all those kind of things. The importance here is if you look at even Jordan Henderson in pre-season, Hendo's in great shape. There's possibility that really quite a few of these more experienced Liverpool players were going through what I would call a fallow season last season, where basically, they put their bodies through incredible amounts of strain. They put their bodies through huge amounts of, stress. And there have been a lot of games they played back to back. For instance, in the previous season when Liverpool played the most games that any team could play in any season. And so you're always going to get a fallow season next season. You're always going to get something a little bit difficult. You might see similar with Man City. Man City also offloading a number of players at this point, partly because they know that the strain and stress that you put on the bodies of these players is a huge amount. And sometimes you need squad turnover, those kind of things, in order to deal with that. Henderson's coming back looking in incredible shape, and I'm not saying therefore he will be absolutely key to every game that Liverpool play, but I think players like Henderson and Thiago are being put to one side way too quickly. The same with players like Virgil van Dijk. It's not saying these guys are at the very peak of their powers, and I think even those players would agree with that, right? That there are years where, you're going to see Henderson at his very physical peak, and arguably when you get to 33, 34, it's more difficult to achieve those levels again. But without being diplomatic about this, and obviously I'm a huge Jordan Henderson fan, some people call me a homer for those kind of things, because the importance of someone like Henderson in terms of setting standards, in terms of showing how to train, the kind of physical fitness that they expect you to be, the level, the peak that you're expected to be in, is really key to show to the rest of the team. Players like this are really important for that. And arguably last season, you saw some of those guys fall below those standards. So resetting them and putting the bar up high again is so key to rebuilding this team, because sometimes if you can't see it, it's very difficult to do. So it's not only just about having a leader that barks orders or having someone who sets standards out on the field. It's about these kind of training issues as well and those kind of things. I think sometimes and very often those things go overlooked. Someone like Jordan Henderson is invaluable when it comes to setting those kind of standards. Same with Mo Salah, same with Virgil van Dijk. It's kind of, here's what went before, and here's what we're expecting now. And, you know, even in making documentaries, you saw those kind of aspects. So I think that's what's key here. And maybe some of the intangibles that we don't see week in, week out, or we can't see on a wide on TV, are very difficult to quantify. Jordan Henderson's a huge part of that. Here are three very experienced midfielders, right? Two of which are being linked with moves away, probably three of which, if we're being completely honest, but Fabinho at the moment is not being moved with the link away, even though Lavia is very heavily linked with Liverpool. Henderson still brings a huge amount of what I spoke about before in these areas, the leadership, the character, the makeup, the constitution. But that's where we go back to this quote, right? Two other players in Thiago and also Fabinho were two players who are incredibly capable of. They got cast in certain ideas, right? People suddenly cast Thiago in this luxury player kind of mentality, right? Even though in the Bundesliga he won back a huge amount of balls, he was incredibly good at closing down players, using his shadow, using the shape of the side, and he was also very good as being beyond the metronome, just dictating the level of play. But what that meant, there was other players in the squad that looked as if they were relying on him to purely dictate and almost be pieces that moved around him. Come in, Henderson, Milner. But then there were other players that you think, what if that guy had worked, right? Like, looking back at here, I've not listed Naby Keita in any of these sides. And I should have been able to list him in one of these sides, which is obviously why some people are skeptical of the Szoboszlai transfer, right? But if this guy had done well in the Liverpool midfield, I think we're looking at and describing a completely different Liverpool side. They didn't want to go 4-2-4 necessarily. In fact, in 4-3-3 would have worked really well with Naby Keita on the right-hand side of that midfield, or possibly on the left. But if Naby Keita had been a more regular starter in this Liverpool midfield, I think you see them being a lot more forward-thinking, a lot more on the front foot, even though obviously they controlled a lot of games. What Naby would have brought to the side, and what we didn't really appreciate because he was injured so much, was what he was trying to achieve. Possibly even the front foot elements of what Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain was trying to bring. By the way, huge amount of experience and character lead the side. At least two of them, but probably with Naby as well, right? Now, James Milner was really also a key part of that, and you'd imagine that there's also other elements. Look at Bajcetic, right? I'm just going to zoom in a little just so you can see this new, young element that's coming through. All these guys are between the age, I believe, of 19 and 24. Some of them may transition to be 25 in the next season, but you get my point. Like, none of them are hitting their peak yet. And in fact, there's a chart somewhere, I haven't included it in here because I couldn't find it, of these guys approaching that peak, beginning of the peak era, right? Bajcetic. Whose wing was he under? Thiago's wing. How key is that to have experienced players, balance in the age of the squad, right? Curtis Jones didn't find maybe a comfortable position for Liverpool and felt like a square peg in a round hole for such a long time. But now look, now they've changed the shape. He's possibly, I think probably changed a huge amount of his game, but still kept those core factors. And they suddenly appreciated in the Liverpool team, right? Not only scoring goals, but also with the capability to hook up a lot of that play, to be a lot of what Fabinho was being asked to be for quite a while, not defensively, but offensively. Szoboszlai and McAllister both coming in as those floating eights, but also capable of winning the ball back fairly high up the field, passing the ball off to one of those front three and getting people involved. And look at the other people that Liverpool are linked with. Obviously, Khéphren Thuram, a huge player for any side that he's going to sign with. Liverpool apparently now second to Bayern Munich in terms of that race for him, and probably even dropped out of that race. But even then, he was someone who was linked, and it's about the archetype of that player. It's about the shape of that player, what they bring, right? It's not just about saying, hey, that specific guy is the one guy. If we'd have done that, then maybe this summer would have been embarrassing because we would have just waited for Bellingham. And in fact, probably is an element of embarrassment there that we even got sucked into that for that longer amount of time. But That's the nature of the game in the modern game, right? And then Lavia. There are elements to Lavia's game that I will evaluate closer to when we sign him or more around the time that we sign him, and I'll do a profile on him at some point, but look at what he brings. Wins the ball back, very unshy of getting in on the tackles, very good at getting the ball again and bringing it up the field. He's got good, he's potentially very good at carrying. I think he's also potentially very good at filling two different roles in there, possibly somewhere between the Fabinho and the Thiago role as well. And also he's got a very high ceiling as well. Liverpool need to trigger that fairly soon, because if they don't pay the 50 million possibly this summer, Man City can buy him back for 40 next summer. But look at all those people, right? Liverpool have been linked with a lot of players that I don't think previously looking at there's a lot of people who would have profiled Liverpool to get some of these guys, right? But Bellingham before, possibly was more like a square peg in a round hole. We weren't quite sure where Bellingham would have played. We know he possibly would have been right centre midfield, possibly one of those floating eights. But now you look at that, you go, there were some misfit toys in here that fit in. And that's where you begin to come on to these next set of guys, right? Look at the relationship possibly between Andy Robertson and Trent Alexander-Arnold. How key will those guys be in terms of the width in the midfield, but also in that central area, hooking up with the McAllisters, the Soboslais, the potentially Lavias, potentially Fabinhos, potentially Kefren Turams as well. I'm also going to drop something in here as well, but I haven't really mentioned, but is more about the future focus at Liverpool right now, where Trent goes. And to an extent, there is an issue with Trent. He has such high ceiling, he's so fantastic, he's such a talented player, he's someone that you would obviously want to build a team around, but finding his perfect position is also a real challenge, because obviously we loved him so much in that right back-ish kind of area, the right wing back really, and now they're trying to transition him into the midfield. No one wants to hear the phrase, it's like a new signing, but to an extent there is that element, right, where it's like, listen, you're opening up the possibilities for this player, you're changing a very talented player's position, and therefore you're expanding what is, I guess, possibilities are on the pitch. You're changing his role, and therefore, maybe Liverpool do need a right back. Maybe they need to sign someone as cover for the games where they need to do more in, a 4-3-3 or a 4-2-4 or something like that, right? But then you probably put Trent in at right back in there anyway. And frankly, I think Klopp and Pep Lingers are thinking 1, 2, 3 generations ahead at this point. So the shape that I'm showing you, whilst it's key for next season, will probably have completely changed again, or be actioned in a different way come the end of the 23-24 season. So Trent's position and what they're asking him to do will again have changed and be upgraded, and we've probably unlocked some more levels for Trent in that time. That's really key in terms of analysing where this Liverpool team is going. It's not just about, hey, we've made these signings, here's what happens immediately. How do these guys fit together in 2-3 seasons' time? Did Liverpool play the same way that they played when Jurgen Klopp first came in 2016 as opposed to 2019 when that team was peaking? Absolutely not. Did we think that Emre Can would be the future of this midfield? Did we think Coutinho would be the future of this midfield? Look at how we profiled them. Both players left in that time. And actually, Liverpool surpassed expectations after that, despite letting 2 of their most technically proficient and most impressive eye test players go. So that's my point with Trent, and with so much of this quote and also the analysis afterwards. It's really key not to just box these guys in and also go, that's the role now, so that's the role always. I guess it's kind of like a reductive, weird analysis. It fits really well for a headline like, how long does Trent fit in this team? But it doesn't really work for Klopp. This is a young, scouse, homegrown player that Liverpool need, A, to fill a quota with, but B, if you've got a quota, it's very likely you're going to want to fill it with one of your most talented players, if not the most technically talented player in the team, and also one of your best personalities. And then Andy Robertson adding the width on the other side. He's clearly not a left centre-back. If we can transition him to that, fantastic. But if we can't, look at the heat map from last season. Look at the width that he brought. There is still a huge role for Andy Robertson here. And let's face it, it's not as if Andy Robertson is a defunct player that if he was offered to other teams, you wouldn't take him right now. Both those guys, if they were offered to any other top Premier League manager right now, maybe with the exception of Arsenal and Man City, only because they've got very specific players who can play in those very specific roles, would not overlook either of those guys. Manchester United would take Trent in a heartbeat, and I think they'd probably take Robertson in a heartbeat. You know what I'm saying? What I'm saying is some people will argue about we've got this guy here. Sure, these guys are both top quality is what I'm saying. It's not about the specifics. We're talking about just above that. And then here's the kind of sticking point for this. When you're rebuilding a midfield, you're also considering what they bring to other aspects of the team. And that's where the Virgil van Dijk element and the Konate element is key, right? The relationships between Trent and Konate Fabinho and Van Dijk were so key, and they were kind of degraded a little bit last season, which is understandable, right? You can understand why and how that would happen. With Virgil van Dijk himself admitting he had a subpar season, and Konate in and out of the side, Liverpool not always able to play the system they wanted, possibly because of injury, possibly also just because players weren't quite fitting into those positions. But look at the adaptability of this team. Look at how Liverpool are fitting into a meta which is coming around right now. I can name you on one hand players who fit into the shape of McAllister and Szoboszlai, or the roles that they would potentially be asked to play. Tonali, clearly a big signing for Newcastle. Kai Havertz, clearly a big signing also for Arsenal. Rice, look at what he will bring to this side that potentially Lavia would also be asked to do. Trent would also be asked to do. The good thing for Arsenal is Rice sort of brings all of that in one. It's very difficult to find all of that in one, that level of ability and awareness. What we're finding here is players with incredible awareness. Szoboszlai able to go all the way along that front line. McAllister able to play more progressively, but also more defensively as well. Liverpool are going to look to control games again. They've got very good profiling in that midfield and also good backup as well. McAllister comes in, you can't spend that money on him and not start him. Szoboszlai comes in, you can't spend that money on him and not start him in some fashion. But there will be transitional periods for both these guys. It's similar to Núñez last season, similar to, well, actually Hakpo got him fairly quickly, but you get my point. Similar even to Konate, similar even to most people who start within this side. Thankfully, they'll get a pre-season under their belt, which probably reduces the amount of league time we'll miss them. But most of the time, Klopp likes to bed them into these teams fairly quickly. And in fact, the Europa League could be a really good place for that as well. I can't move this one around, can I? I can here. So look, Trent will still play out there. There will be times where you see Trent super right midfield, and there's times where you might see someone like Szoboszlai a little bit further back covering. But if you overload a side and you put them in these positions, the likelihood is you're going to see Liverpool trying to control with 7, possibly even 8 players in the opposition half. Maybe Virgil van Dijk and Konate pushing up. Still a very high line for Liverpool. Still wanting to control that space. So Lavia allows that because he's also incredibly aggressive in the tackle, like Konate is. He's also incredibly intelligent, like Konate is. I think a lot of people profile some of these players in weird ways. Liverpool clearly know more than we do at this point. But look at it, like that's a very advanced, progressive side. Trent obviously is a right wing back in that. He could also play back there in the Lavia centre midfielder type role. I'm not saying that Liverpool are going to dominate every game and therefore they will win the league, but this is a great transitional season for Liverpool. This is what Liverpool were kind of waiting for and square pegs in round holding themselves last season. And we go back to this quote, right? Because I think it's so key for me. Need to find it. We didn't even realise the mess we've made. In what Liverpool were trying to achieve last season, the analysis of it was so sloppy. The analysis of it was so weird because a lot of it was quite prescriptive of what they thought Liverpool were trying to achieve. They didn't understand that Liverpool were in a change period. Now I get it. Liverpool should still have performed to a higher level than they did. That's fine, right? When you profile the players that are coming in, when you profile them just only entering their peak or about to enter their peak or actually nowhere even near their peak, if you're looking at Lavia's or the Szoboszlais or even Hakpo and Núñez's, you see what's happening here. You see how Liverpool are turning over a team, how they're turning over a squad. And, Robertson can obviously come back there. He's not always going to be a left midfielder. But if you looked at his average position last season, it was way more progressed. So, zoom in a little on that. Yeah. Anyway, the point here is we can get incredibly prescriptive. We can start to say I don't think this guy's going to fit in. I think some people may struggle with the transition, but we've got a guy who's already played in the Premier League for a while. We've got another guy who's already played in the Premier League for a while, as long as he signs for Liverpool. And the same with Szoboszlai as well. He's got experience at a quite nicely transitioning league into the Premier League. Championship players tend to come across and be just as strong as Bundesliga players. But if you profile the Bundesliga player correctly, which is what Liverpool were trying to do with the likes of Naby Keita, and they're not always injured or having off-field problems, then they're going to transition in quite nicely, right? Liverpool, I'm not saying going to be like some hugely functional team. I think there's going to be a lot of excitement. They're going to be playing on the front foot. They've had that difficult season, and you tend to follow that difficult season with a season where you tend to find them on the up again. That's this side, right? So, I'd love to know what your comments below look like. I'd love to know what your opinions are on the way this team moves around the square or the, that kind of the box midfield. Whether that sticks around for a long time, I actually think Liverpool might try and play and progress their shape even more, mainly because other sides have worked out how to play a box midfield. There's plenty of managers who understand how to play it. That has been trendy, but will probably go out of trend fairly soon. How then do you win it's more about understanding the overloads, problem solving on the fly. McAllister's very good at that. Szoboszlai's very good at that. Trent's very good at that. Maybe not defensively at right back area, but in midfield, definitely. Lavia, very good at that. Spotting trends, staying on players, being very, very specific with his briefs. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below, and I look forward to hearing what your opinions are on where this Liverpool team are going. In my humble opinion, Jota can still be very key. Diaz can still be very key. I'm looking forward to knowing what you think about Nunez. Once we've made those signings later on in the year, I'm going to talk a little bit more about where I think this team is going. But at the moment, I think that's how it looks. But I think there's something more to come here. I think it could actually be Trent a little bit wider out there. It could be that, and it could even be that. Probably that, actually. More like that. So that offers something else to Liverpool. Overloads, again, numerical supremacy. What is Trent good at? Look at it. Kanate's got a lot to cover there, but that's where Lavia kind of comes in, right? And that's why McAllister's so good. Can also come back. Curtis Jones showed some of those qualities and elements as well. So I'm interested to know how you guys think he fits into this. I love how Curtis Jones changed towards the end of last season, or the change that we did see on the field. Maybe we've been seeing it for a while in Liverpool training, and he just hadn't been able to do that out on the field because games hadn't allowed him to, or he'd had to sacrifice because other players weren't as confident in those new positions. What I'm saying is, it's not always about finding that perfect starting 11, though that would really help a side very consistently. It's about finding a set of players who are consistently in the squad for you. Man City had the least amount of injuries last season. Chelsea had the most. Liverpool probably somewhere in between, right? But what that shows you is Man City very consistently had personnel available to them, and they played them very consistently. That's great. Crack on. The mess that was Chelsea last season was so key. We go back to this Liverpool side. They only ever played together once, and yet they're still in our memory. It's not just about getting obviously it is about getting these individual players who are brilliant within those formations. For a while we had players who were floating last season. These guys all seem so convincingly them in their own positions. That's what Liverpool need to look at next season. And I'm not saying therefore they can't be adaptable, they can't play in different positions, they can't transition, they can't do any of these things and be much more fluid like I'd imagine a lot of Premier League managers are asking their team to be. What I am asking is how they fit together and how they can make this iconic side again. This is the rebuild. I'm interested to know what you guys think about my hypothesis as to where the Premier League is going, because I think this new position, I might talk about that in a video, the new meta of the Tonali, Havertz, Szoboszlai, McAllister might play a bit deeper. There have been other players who've signed in those kind of positions as well. Maybe, we're probably even looking at a Foden in those types of positions. Again, Pep Guardiola setting the trend in the Premier League. Bernardo Silva's, David Silva's, Gundogan's, all these kind of guys, so key to their teams, so key to what it was they were trying to achieve. I'd love to know what it is that you guys think is going to happen with this Liverpool side now. I appreciate chatting to you guys always. Sorry the video is a little bit longer. Maybe I could have made this video in 3 minutes. But sometimes I just appreciate your company, and sometimes I just like to chat it through, chat it out. I will see you guys in the next video when we are talking about more transfers. Much love. Bye.